Hello, and welcome to Keep the Channel Open, a podcast featuring conversations with artists, writers, and curators. My name is Mike Sakasagawa, and this is episode 67. Today's guest is Jin Lee. Hey there, folks. No monologue today. Let's just jump straight in, shall we? Jin Lee is a writer based in New York. Her debut novel, Free Food for Millionaires, was a national bestseller and named a top 10 book of the year by The Times of London, NPR's Fresh Air, and USA Today. Her latest novel, Pachinko, was published in February of 2017. It was a finalist for the National Book Award, and it was on over 75 Book of the Year lists for 2017, including NPR, PBS, CNN, LitHub, Goodreads, and many, many more. Now, I read Pachinko earlier this year, and it just knocked me out. It was amazing. It's the story of 4 generations of a Korean family living in Japan, starting in the early 20th century, moving through the war years, and ending in the 1980s. Now, this is a thing that I'd heard a bit about, the way that Koreans are discriminated against in Japan, including being denied citizenship despite having lived there for many generations. But, you know, it's one thing to know about something in the abstract as an idea, and it's something else to be able to connect with a human story. And wow, this novel does that. It's an intensely empathetic and human and humanizing book, and just, you know, it just moved me deeply. There's a link in the show notes for the book's official page, and you can find links there for where you can purchase a copy from pretty much all the major outlets. I highly recommend it. So let's get started. As always, if you'd like to join in the conversation, you can use the hashtag ChannelOpenPod to live tweet the episode. And now here's my conversation with Jin Lee. Well, I wanted to first, before I said anything else, I just wanted to say how much I enjoyed your book, how much it meant to me. It was really something unlike anything I'd ever read before, and it really resonated very deeply with me. So I wanted to first just say thanks, and, you know.
That means the world to me, because I never thought that I would sell this book. So. Well,
that's interesting. So what makes you say that?
Oh, because who cares about 600,000 people? And if it was wanted, I think that there should have been a book before. This is the first book written in English that's a novel about the Korean-Japanese community. And I care a lot about it, but it seemed like nobody else wanted to take on this book. So I figured, oh, well, you know, I'll finish it. And when I finish it, I thought that in case my agent couldn't sell it, then I would try to sell it or give it away to an academic press that would have mercy on me. So the fact that it's actually been published, it's such a surprise.
Well, I mean, I know that I'm not the first
I'm not being modest. It's just if you think about it, it doesn't make sense that people like this book. I mean, apart from the novel aspect of it, but the subject matter, it's very unusual. So,
well, it is a topic that I haven't personally seen a lot about, and as you say, like it's certainly different from what a lot of, I think, the sort of mainstream American publishing industry is used to. But like, I know for sure that a lot of, like, my Asian American friends, for example, that the book has meant a lot to them, especially Korean Americans, but not only Korean Americans. So,
actually, most people who've responded really strongly to it are people, and it's very weird for me. I'm so completely stunned by it, but if you go to any of my events, they're like 85% white, and they kind of connect with this immigrant portion of it, or feeling excluded. And then of the Asian Americans, I've had this incredibly strong response from East Asians who are immigrants, who have an immigrant background. And that's been incredibly just so humbling. And I'm so grateful for their kindness and support, because they've generated this kind of word of mouth. And that's the reason why we have this tale on this book. So my publisher is obviously thrilled. But again, it's such a surprise to me. And I'm really grateful. I think I'm really, really grateful, because I'm almost 50. And I didn't expect this to happen.
So that thing that you just said about Well, first of all, I'm a little surprised to hear that you say that like 85% of the in-person audiences have been white. Although I guess, given the demographics of
Yeah,
America, maybe.
it's very demographically representative. So I'll have blacks in my audience, Asians in my audience, Latinos, but it's very follows the national population, which has been also interesting too.
The thing about connecting over the sort of immigrant story, that's certainly something that was in my mind a lot. So just to, put this out there, myself, I'm a fifth generation Japanese American.
I know who you are. I also read your beautiful essay about your grandfather who was in the 442, which is a history that I'm very familiar with. And I think it's so important. And I wish that more people in America knew about it, not just Asian Americans and not just Japanese Americans, but Americans in general. It's very important.
Well, thank you so much. I guess the only reason that I bring that up, my own background is just because one of the things that has been on my mind as I've been thinking about this story is how for me, there was a lot of opportunity to connect with my family's American story. But at the same time, I was always very cognizant of the fact that this is not an American story, like that it is something that's very specific to a people and a place that are not actually mine. Does that make sense?
Well, I'm aware of that too. And at the same time, I do think that the reason why it becomes, this book has now been purchased by 25 countries. So it'll be translated into all those languages. And one of the first countries that it really did very well in is New Zealand. Isn't that weird? I know. And then also like Ireland, it's like they took the book and they ran with it. And you're going, whoa, that is so weird. It wasn't Korea. Korea took a long time for them to purchase the book. And Japan bought it about 2 months ago in this incredibly prestigious publisher in Japan. So I've been trying to think about like what this means, because I do come from the position, because this book took me almost 3 decades to write, that I had wasted most of my life caring about something that nobody cares about. And then I see this response, and I think people are connecting with it. And when I have interviewed all the people about why do you think you found yourself in the story, almost invariably they say they connected with this idea of being unwanted in a hostile landscape. So, and whether they felt it themselves or they identified with people who had been treated badly. And of course, readers, especially smart readers, are a self-selected sample, right? So you're kind of preaching to the choir in a way. But I was really quite taken aback by the universality of the story, which I did not intend. Like I wasn't thinking about it. I thought I'm going to be so incredibly particular about this story, because I was so worried that someone would say, well, you're Korean American. How can you write about the Korean Japanese? Which is a totally fair thing to say. And I was really worried, and in all of my anxiety, the way I dealt with it is just by doing as much homework as humanly possible.
The story is beautiful and it's deeply humanizing. I just in the back of the copy that I have, there's a little interview between you and somebody from the publisher, I assume. And one of the things that sort of jumped out at me was you talk about that war is one of your subjects.
Yes.
And how, our view of history is so informed by sort of this great man theory so often, that these big figures, and we don't get so much visibility on what the day-to-day life might have been for the people actually living through these periods. And it seems to me that all of the great works of sort of historical literature are the ones that do that really focus in on these very human stories and make the story, these grand events, very personal and very, where you can see just like how this goes for one life, or in your case, in the case of this book, one family's life. And, it's something that really strikes me that right now, especially, is something that's deeply necessary in our art, is to find ways to see not only the depictions of human beings' inhumanity to one another, but also the ways in which we can find that humanity in each other. It seems like exceptionally relevant right now. You know what I mean?
I do, and thank you for saying that. When I was a kid, college anyway, and this connects with the fact that Tom Wolfe just passed away recently. He had written a really famous essay, which you may have seen. I think you're much younger than I am, because it's called Stalking the Billion-Footed Beast, and it came out in Harper's Magazine. And I read it. I read this essay several times. I remember keeping it by my desk because it was so important to me, in which he was criticizing some of the literary novelists who he felt were kind of snubbing him because he was considered more journalist than fiction writer, which I thought was really quite unfair. I thought that he was very good at both. And Stalking the Billion-Footed Beast, this essay, which you can Google, and it's so important, this essay, that there's a lot of derivative stuff about it. And he got in trouble for writing this essay, but I agreed with him in many ways, which was that I think fiction writers are supposed to take on the big issues. And it's hard though, because I think it's easier to not take on those big issues. And if you want to take on the big issues, you have to do a lot of research. And ideally, the way Tom Wolfe worked is to do a lot of interviews. You have to talk to people, you have to listen to them, and you have to think about them, and you have to be disagreed with. And I work like a journalist wannabe because I have grown up incredibly private and shy. But I think having the format of the interview allows me to meet people I never would have normally have met and ask questions that are really difficult. And because I don't record, and because I don't take that many notes when I do my interviews, and because I write fiction, people really let down their guard and tell me things. And I have learned that I was wrong about so many people. So, and I think once I figured all that out, and then I picked certain themes that I really care about, like let's say war, or let's say about revenge or envy, or like some of these bigger themes, then I have to sort of sit down and say, well, what do I really believe? And I want to be socially relevant. I do. It means a lot to me. And I want to think about these things because I walk around, and this sounds so absurd, but I walk around so heartbroken about the way the world is working these days. And I'm a parent. My son is 20. And I think a lot about, I'm almost 50. And let's say I get to, last another 30 years in a clear way. And that'd be very fortunate, right? What do I want to leave behind for my son and his children? Like, how do I want to have spent this time on this planet? And because even though it's an incredibly wonderful time in history to live, and in that sense, I'm not nostalgic at all, because I think for people of color, this is probably the best time in the world to live. And for women, that said, it's also an incredibly broken time, it's a really devastated time in terms of certain industries, because technology has disintermediated so much of what we know about what work is and what labor is. So it's becoming more polarized in terms of class, but in terms of health, or in terms of freedoms, and in terms of ideas of democracy, things have actually quite advanced. That said, all these things are happening, and I think, well, what is it that I really believe, and what do I want to leave as a record, or in terms of what I imagine as a new world, and how do we take a moral stance at what we see? And I do think that is the job of the novelist, and I guess in that sense, I believe that Tom Wolfe is correct in saying we writers have to think and make things out of what's true.
One of the things that, comes to mind for me, hearing you talk about that, and this sort of came to mind a few times as I was reading, is sort of the comparison between, like one comparison I thought of as I was reading was between this book and John Steinbeck. And obviously, so Steinbeck has East of Eden, a multi-generational novel. But then
I love East of Eden. I love it.
Yeah.
I love that book.
me too. I grew up in that area that he was depicting. So it's sort of always loomed large in my,
Also, Richard Brodigan is also from that hood too.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, he's from Salinas.
Oh, wow. That's where I was born. But like, hearing you talk about this today, the comparison that comes to mind is not so much East of Eden, but actually Grapes of Wrath.
Yes.
And, so many people credit that book with having sort of awakened a certain awareness of the plight of the Okie migrants and finding a way to humanize these people that were deeply reviled at the time. And it seems like this book of yours has a similar project. It's doing a similar sort of thing,
I mean, it's incredibly flattering because Steinbeck is so smart and he cared so much, I think. He cared a lot about these issues. And I think sometimes prose writers, we're fumbling with the words and the sentences. And yet I think the prose writers who care a lot about the big issues and who care about taking a moral stance, it's worth the fumbling. It's worth trying to get better at your craft. And I am interested in these big questions about money and class. Like, so my first book is about money and class and how immigrants who aspire to things cannot aspire in the same way according to the American narrative of success. So, and I wanted to present that as an idea for especially immigrant children who try very hard to succeed. And my first book is taught at Columbia, and I get to meet all these kids every year when the professor brings me in to talk to them. And when I meet them, I tell them it doesn't have to be about banking or law or medicine. There's so many things that you can do. And that's not to say you need to be thinking that you can do anything, because I think that's kind of a lie as well. So, but just questioning this idea of money and class and to talk about it. So I think you may know that Pachinko and Free Food are part of a trilogy. And it's about the diaspora. So it's a trilogy about the diaspora. It's called The Koreans. And the third book is about the thing that's most important for Koreans all over the world. So I'm going to take a stab at trying to write about the idea of education and what it means to Koreans all over the world. Because the first was about money and class for Koreans in America. And then the second book is about Koreans in Japan, the idea of what is home in the diaspora. With an extreme situation of a place that was hostile to them. And then thirdly, it's about this idea of education for every Korean.
One of the things that really strikes me about this book is, hearing you talk about how you want to engage with these big ideas. And the work certainly does do that. But I think one of the dangers that some writers have when they want to engage with the big ideas is that the work ends up feeling very heavy-handed and sort of didactic, which this just really does not. Like, it never feels like a treatise or a textbook. It always feels like a story.
Oh, thank you. I really tried not to do that. Have you ever read John Dos Passos?
No.
Oh, he's this great writer and a very great American writer who had a lot of political agendas. And his books are really smart, but they're really hard to read. And I remember thinking, why is it that I really admire Dos Passos? And I admire Dos Passos because he was taking on the really big issues. And he had a lot of really great things to say. And I thought his moral stance was correct. However, it's such a pill. You're like, oh man, it's like, how much spinach can you eat, So there was that sense. And I thought, well, what are the books that I really enjoy reading? So some of my twin goals in writing novels is it has to be edifying. Otherwise, I don't want to take up your time. Like, if you just want entertainment, that's not me. I really want the experience to be edifying for myself, because it has to engage me as I write it and rewrite it. And I would like for it to impart some value because you've given me your time and your attention. But the second thing is that it's really important that it's entertaining and enjoyable, and it should give you a kind of pleasure, so much so that you're immersed and you're in the dream of what novels can do best. And because that's the kind of stuff that I like to read. So if I read a book and it's really immersive, I'm so grateful because I did want that. And that's what the novel was supposed to be. And yet, if I learn something cool and different, and if I change even a little bit, even if just 2 degrees, if I can shift 2 degrees toward the right angle that I should be going toward, then it's really worth having spent that time. And it is a lot to ask somebody for 12 or 14 hours of their lives. I think asking for $20 or $10 or whatever paperback costs now, depending upon who your retailer is, that's not a big deal. People spend that on coffee, literally. But to ask you for 14 hours of your life, I better be worth it. Like, that book better be worth your time. And I think about that the entire time I'm writing it, especially when I'm revising it. Especially when I'm revising it, I think a great deal about how valuable your time is to me and how I want you to walk away thinking, oh, I'm glad I did that. Like, I'm not going to forget it.
Well, I have a hard time imagining anybody walking away from this book and not feeling that way.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, it's really just right down to the last scene is just amazing. And one of, you know, I was just rereading the last chapter this morning, and, you know, I obviously don't want to give anything away, but one of the things that really struck me about the book as a whole is how so much of what happens to these characters is sort of driven by the circumstances that they're in, which are, you know, it's like in one way, it's a series of just horrible things that happen over and over to them throughout this story. And yet at each turn, it's not just a question of like bad things happening and it being entirely about, you know, pathos and pity for them. It's that in between those moments there, and then again at the end, there's always these small little moments of grace that happen. And it seemed to me that the book is at least as much about those moments of humaneness, like maybe at the end between the groundskeeper and Sunja, or you know, whoever it might be, that it's at least as much about showing those moments of humanity and grace as it is about showing the horrible things that happen, the tragic things too, you know?
Also, thank you so much. That's incredibly generous of you to say. The groundskeeper is a really important character to me because he is somebody who is watching the dead. So he serves a metaphorical function, and he also serves a class function, which is that he is a person who has decided that he is happy to have his job and to do that well. And he lives a life of isolation. And in these moments, and he is ethnically Japanese, and the kindness that he shows Sanja is not remarkable. It is actually normal, because that is the experience of so many Korean Japanese with the Japanese. So a lot of people talk about the racism that the Koreans experienced in Japan. However, they experience a great deal of institutional racism as well as social norm racism. However, interpersonally, there are many Japanese who love their neighbor, and there are many Korean Japanese who love the Japanese. And I think that is the reason why they stayed. So the Korean Japanese weren't dumb. Like, they didn't stay in a place that didn't want them, period. They stayed because there were so many more exceptions than the rules. So the rules were unfair, but the average Japanese person didn't make those rules. And the more I studied war diaries kept by Japanese women and men during the war, I realized how they were not allowed to explore how unfair life was. And they were certainly not allowed to express it, because if they expressed it with their neighbors, then there was real social punishment where they would, they wouldn't get rations, or they would be treated badly by their neighbors, or they would be ostracized. And because of this fear, they had to kind of go along with this war that they were definitely going to lose. And I was so moved by some of the accounts by Japanese housewives who had to send their sons off to essentially die or be dismembered and come back. If they came back, they would come back without having limbs. And I thought, if you were a middle-class Japanese woman and you didn't have any connections and power, and you were being rationed with food, and you were surviving on, let's say, 800 to 900 calories a day, because that's what the government said that you are allowed to have. And somehow you had to stretch this out, and then every week you had to deal with the queen bee who was in charge of the rationing cards and all the distribution of the goods that were available to the average person. You were constantly worried about face and what you're supposed to do. And when you're sent off to war, you were supposed to have a little party, which is what I learned. And when you have the party, you're supposed to serve some sort of snacks. So you're inviting all your friends over from your street or all your neighbors, and everybody knew that your son was about to go off to this horrible war. And you're probably incredibly devastated because you know what's going to happen to him. And yet you had to scrounge around in your bare cupboard to try to find snacks for the party for sending your son off to die. I mean, this is what the average Japanese person experience, not the ruling class person, because a ruling class person somehow can get out of the situation. So when I say history has failed us, I don't think it's failed the Koreans. It's failed the Japanese too. So, and that's what I really learned from my research, which made all the grace that much more important. Because for a Japanese person to be gracious to a Korean person at that moment during the war, it wasn't easy because they were losing too.
It's sort of, as an author and as a reader, sort of a tricky balance to find, because I feel like, as in this book, you have this really deep sense of empathy for all of the characters. I mean, even some of the ones who are doing really shitty things to each other, you can kind of find this justification, or at least they understand why, or they're doing it for a reason that makes sense to them in a sort of way. But like, and this thing that you're talking about having empathy for the Japanese in this situation, some of them at least, that's something that resonates with me. At the same time, and this is again something really relevant to the sort of political discourse of the United States right now, is that I really feel like the book very much invites the reader to contemplate the complicity of the average Japanese person in upholding these structures, and that's something that was on my mind a lot as I was reading it.
Yeah, in the same way we're complicit today for the things that we don't speak out against, or that we don't vote for the politician who does not represent good things in accordance with our national history and our values. So I think the average person is consistently complicit, and the average person is essentially self-interested. However, I also think that the average person in his or her self-interest cares more about having good relationships, and the wish to have good relationships requires us to sacrifice. Because you can't have a relationship without sacrifice. No, certainly not one that's ongoing.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I mean, I could keep talking about this book forever, but why don't we take a little break and then come back and do the second segment?
Sure.
So for the second segment, I always invite the guest to bring a topic of their own, which can be whatever you'd like to talk about, whatever's on your mind. So what would you like to talk about today?
I guess I thought I would talk late. So I've been thinking a lot about persevering as a writer, because lately I've been meeting a lot of younger writers, or writers who have deferred their plans to write because their daily needs prohibited them, and also because there are so many distractions now. So you can have a genuine thing like making a living and taking care of your family. A parent gets sick, or your child needs attention with homework, let's say, and then you can't work on the great American novel. But I've been thinking a lot about how deferring those dreams is also causing people to suffer. So one of the little solutions that I think about is, how about if you could, one, make time for your project, and secondly, the more important question is, why is that project not interesting enough to you to go back to it half an hour a day or an hour a day?
Well, this is something that's certainly on my mind a lot, having trying to maintain a couple of different creative practices at the same time as having a full-time job and 3 kids.
Sure. Sure.
It can be pretty challenging to, find the time to sort of execute on what feels necessary, and then still, take care of your health, for example.
Yeah. Absolutely. But because I've been meeting so many people now in these kind of boot camp classes that I teach, and I don't do them very often. I have only one more coming up, and I'm not going to do it for a long time. But because I've been spending more time with them, I see how much they suffer privately about not honoring their wish to make more things. And then one of the things that I do is I ask them, what are you working on? And they'll tell me what they're working on. They're very sheepish about it, or they don't feel entitled to talk about it because it hasn't won the Nobel Prize yet. And then I realize, and I'm not being facetious about that, I realize that the standards that we have for the work that we make are so unrealistic for the amount of time that we put in. But we think that unless it's perfect, we can't talk about it. But if you want to be an artist, you have to look an idiot most of the time and for a long time. But no one wants to talk about that because that seems so indefinite and uncertain and embarrassing. And it troubles me that we have so much shame with this idea of making mistakes and looking foolish. But I don't know of a story of any biography of any major artist, writer, creator, inventor who didn't look like an idiot for a good decade or two.
You know what this reminds me of is Ira Glass gave a keynote speech, and I can't remember what the occasion was, but the transcript was published on transom.org a while back, where he was talking about when you're first starting out, and he was talking about radio and podcasting, but it really applies to everything, where he says when you're first starting out, there's this gap between what you want the work to be doing and what you're capable of doing. And the reason that there's a gap is because when you don't, like, anybody that gets involved in a creative endeavor is getting involved because on some level they have good taste. So it gets really frustrating when you know what's good. And so you know that the stuff that you're making isn't up to the standards of the stuff that you like, but there's just no way to get there except by actually doing the work and making the crappy stuff first and getting the time in and the practice. And that so many people end up stopping because of that initial frustration, when if you were able to just sort of push through it, eventually you would get closer to where you want to be.
That's completely correct.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hardest part about having the faith that somehow it will happen, that you will improve by 2 degrees or 3 degrees or 4 degrees, because we kind of want the 180 right away. And I've never seen that happen ever. I imagine that your first podcast was a bit more fumbling than today's.
Oh, my goodness, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So how many interviews do you have to do until you feel like, I sound pretty good? It takes a long time, and you have to go through the bad pancakes to make the good one. But I think we can say it until we're blue in the face, but then if you ask the average person, well, how long can you tolerate making bad pancakes? That's a different question. And I think in a way, it's really the wrong question, because it's not about just looking stupid. The big question is really like, who cares? Who cares? It doesn't count anyway. So why don't you just do it for you? And then the bigger question is, why don't you pick a topic that you care about so much that it's worth not watching Netflix?
Yeah. It's funny because I think a lot of this sort of fear that people have of making the bad work has to do with this sort of narrative that you only get one chance. Like if you want to make something, you want to put it out there, but you're terrified. I mean, certainly this is something that I've felt before. I just recently started, like this last week, just started submitting my first poems for publication, and it was really nerve-wracking because I, not having gone to school for poetry and not really having much of a crit community for that, like all I have is my own judgment to know whether or not these poems are any good. And the idea that this is the first time an editor might see my work and they might judge me forever on that it can be a little daunting. In my case, the first place that answered back was a rejection, but it was a very nice personalized rejection that invited me to continue going. So that was actually very heartening.
That's amazing, by the way, because did you know that rejections have a certain kind of a status, like striation? Did you know that?
I'm not sure exactly what you mean.
So usually you can get a form rejection.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you go in unagented, if you send in a work that's unagented or unsolicited, it goes into the slush pile.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who read the slush pile are not necessarily the most qualified people. They're just usually students, like either MFA students or grad students, and they're not necessarily published either. So they're just kind of going in because they're good readers, which makes them qualified as readers, but not necessarily as editors. It won't even reach the editors for a long time. And then, so you can get a form rejection if they say, no, thank you. And they decide, nah, it's not going to work. And it could be very, very personal and not necessarily even about the requirements or the demands of what that poem needs. And then if they like it, then they'll send you a personalized rejection, which is actually very close to an acceptance. So you jumped to the next level without going through the form rejection first.
Well, you know,
it took me a really long time to get personalized rejections.
I guess sort of the thing that I was thinking about with this, you know, is, I mean, it was very heartening to me to get, cause that's more or less how it works with photography as well, which is the sort of submission milieu that I'm more familiar with. But is that, you know, one of the things that took me a really long time with photography was that part of getting, comfortable with submitting work had to do with eventually building up a community, because again, I didn't go to school for that. So I didn't have the sort of built-in network that you get in school. Was sort of connecting with other photographers and building up a community and getting some insight and a little bit more confidence that way. And I think
I don't have an MFA.
It does seem to me that that's one of the really great things about going to an MFA is that you have an opportunity to, you know, maybe it's not necessarily,
I don't have one.
Yeah.
I don't have one, and I'm not so sure if it's that beneficial to know that many writers. That sounds like a totally contrarian thing to say. But I guess the reason why I say this is now I know a ton of writers. Not very well, but I know them just because I've done so many events. Mm-hmm. And I have a very superficial relationship where I meet somebody and think, wow, I really like his work. And he turned out to be a nice person for the 2 hours that I met him. It's not necessarily a friendship. Mm-hmm. And then you don't see them again probably ever. Or you hear about their work and you sort of follow the work. It's like, oh, he's really, you know, he was nice. I met him for 2 hours. And his work and his personality not match, or you'll meet somebody and you're like, oh wow, she's not very nice, but her work is amazing. So what does that mean? But in terms of getting insight about the process of publishing, I haven't really gotten that from other writers. I think whenever people ask me how to get published, I say, well, I know the stuff that everybody knows. And as a matter of fact, because of the internet, we all know way more than we probably need to know. About how to write a cover letter or how you get an agent or what contests to enter, what not to enter. However, I don't know how much it helps to know other people. I know that sounds really crazy because one of the things that I notice about people in MFAs, because I've at this point have given master classes at like famous MFAs, and I get in there and I see all these really bright-eyed, young, attractive writers, and I meet them and I read their work. And again, the work is incredibly competent and really good. And they're so professional, you know? At the same time, I kind of think I give you credit for taking your craft seriously enough to change your life and sometimes enter into debt to become an artist, which is completely not familiar to me because I just couldn't really imagine that scenario where I borrow $150,000 to learn how to be a novelist. Because if you don't have funding, that's pretty much what it costs you. However, I do think there's a lot of freedom that you can have from not doing that, because I've seen a lot of work produced from MFA programs where they didn't know how to write novels because novels aren't workshopped. They can't be. Just by the very nature of what a novel is as a form, it can't be read by everybody. So they take pieces or they take short stories and they workshop those, but it's really difficult to ever workshop an entire novel. Sometimes for your senior thesis or your graduating thesis, you can do it with one teacher, but you're not necessarily going to learn all the different points of view. So I write in an omniscient. I almost never, ever, ever see anybody from an MFA program writing an omniscient point of view. And I think that's a shame because it's a really helpful point of view. It lends to an enormous canvas. Like you can have a really big canvas. You can have a great flexibility in terms of coming in and out of people's heads and telling lots of different stories. You can even have the conflicting versions of a story. Whereas what I see lately much more is third person shifting with chapter heading changes or first person shifting with chapter heading changes. And that's lovely and it can be very entertaining. However, it doesn't have that same level of reality because in reality, we don't all have a Rashomon kind of experience where, oh, this is Mike's point of view and this is Min's point of view of the same event. Like, that's interesting, but can't be the only way to tell a story.
I think, for me, what it comes to is not, I mean, like on a craft level, there's like, how do you get to the point of being good? And then from like a career level, there's the point of like, well, how do you get to the point of being successful? But I think for me, what community has done for me is, like at a certain point, if you're going to do anything, you have to feel like you have permission to be participating in that industry and that can come about like, I mean, ultimately you have to decide that for yourself. But I think the first inklings of that process of feeling like you have permission to be doing the work oftentimes can come about through other people in one way or another, if that makes sense.
I agree with you. The danger of that, however, is then they also have the power to take that permission away.
Yeah, that's true.
So I worry about that, especially for people of color, because we so rarely get permission to make things, and especially to be creative individuals. One of the horrible stereotypes about Asian Americans is that we're competent, but we're not creative. Which is incredibly stupid. Forget racist. It's just dumb. It's like a dumb idea because if you think about the fact that there's like 2.7 billion Asians just in India and China, are you really going to say they're just all competent and none of them are creative? It's silly. And that's outside of America. And of course, we can't make these arguments about Asian Americans ever because it's silly. That said, going back to this idea of getting permission, I worry a lot about that because whenever you give people the power to judge you, it can turn on a dime. It can. And also it can be incredibly arbitrary and subjective. Yeah. And that could really mess with your head because the thing that we really need more than anything is to be free to play. And that play is very important, I think, in terms of our making things. Like, I don't know how many images you have to shoot before you get exactly the right one that you want, but you needed to have played a lot to get that right image, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It took me a while to get to the point where I even knew what I was trying to do with my photographs. But and a big part of that for me, too, was actually getting rejected over and over again and having to sort of figure out what wasn't working for other people and what wasn't working for myself ultimately. But yeah.
Yeah, I think developing an aesthetic sensibility does take a lot of time. And sometimes it's teachers. Sometimes it's by looking at the works that you admire. But everybody, and sometimes it's through rejections. Like, I guess I've been rejected so much. Oh my God. It's just horrible. And every single one of them was devastating. I'm not going to pretend like, oh yeah, I'm fine with it, because I hate it. Like this year I got rejected for 4 fellowships, 2 teaching positions, and 1 editor position. And this is after I got all this like public accolades. And I remember thinking, man, they don't want me. Who do they take? And my mind immediately went to the wrong question. Because who cares who they took? It has nothing to do with it. And because I don't know if it's subjective or objective. I don't know. Because I ended up getting 2 other fellowships. So I guess the important thing was, when I thought I was ready, I should just submit, and maybe you get something.
Yeah. Well, so there's one last question that I always like to end with. And that is, if there is a piece of art or literature or just general creativity that you've experienced recently that meant something to you.
I just finished reviewing a book by Han Gong called Human Acts. And it is a novel, but it's almost like a novel through interlinked short stories. And it's a translation by a British translator, Deborah Smith. And I think this book review is going to come out in the New York Review of Books probably this month or next month. And when I first approached this book, and the author, Han Gong, won the Man Booker International Prize for The Vegetarian. And this was her second book that came out in translation. And there's another one that's coming out, or came out, called The White Book, I think. Anyway, but about Human Acts, when I was reading it, it really struck me because in so many ways it was disgusting. And by disgusting, I mean it was literally graphic and disturbing. Like, it's not pleasant to read. Like, there's a lot of descriptions of blood and gore and the stench of rotting bodies. I mean, she really just goes there and she just keeps describing it. And at one point you're going, all right, enough already. But then after I went through that phase, and because I was reviewing, I had to look at it again in terms of what she was trying to do in terms of her craft and also the intention of her story. And the more I read it, the more I realized the existential and important question she was discussing about the idea of the soul, S-O-U-L. And that really amazed me about how she wanted me to get to that. But in order for me to get to that, I had to dig and dig and dig and dig. But once I dug, I saw the beauty and the absolute sublime way she talks about the soul. And then I just thought, wow, this is what art can do. It can both repel and it can both attract. But it depends on how you look at it and how long and deeply you look at something. So I thought it was really impressive.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Mike. You're awesome.
Okay, so as I mentioned at the top of the show, I've put a link in the show notes for where you can purchase a copy of Pachinko. I really just can't recommend this book highly enough. It's fantastic. So do go pick up a copy if you can. And hey, if you can get it from an independent bookstore, so much the better. And that is our show. If you'd like to get in touch, you can find all of the show's contact and social media info in the show notes. If you'd like to support the show, a monthly pledge in any amount to our Patreon campaign is greatly appreciated. You can find that at patreon.com/sakeriver. That's sake like the drink and river like river. Our theme music is by Poddington Bear. You can find more of his music available for licensing at soundofpicture.com. We will be back in 2 weeks with a new conversation, so be sure to come back for that one. And until then, remember, keep the channel open.